Animal Crossing and generation loss. What did these two things have in common? This house right here. Hi. If you've been in Rambo's Discord server as of late, specifically in the Generation Loss channel, you've probably seen me chatting. Hi, I'm Snoog. This is what I look like. And I'm the crazy kid who's recreating the cabin from Generation Loss Episode 1 in Animal Crossing. This was spurred on by the fact that I have a Generation Loss hyperfixation at the moment, and I recently found my Switch after having lost it between two couch cushions for months. It found the remote's hiding spot. Anyway, I am going to give you a tour of the house, and in this tour I am going to take each room and break down what details I wanted to add into my in-game recreation, as well as how I did that, and some other things that I just tossed in for fun. I had so much fun making this, and I hope everyone who watched the play-by-play in the Generation Lost channels also had fun hearing me make this. At the end of the video, I will be sharing my island's updated dream code so that you guys can come to my island if you have the game and see the house for yourself. But that's the end of the video. Let's get into the rooms themselves. Before we get into the rooms themselves, let's talk a little bit about the layout. If we look at the set, we can realize that the rooms are in a straight line. We see the center room first, then the kitchen, then the basement, then the bedroom, and then the attic. But Animal Crossing houses don't work like that. But we do have an easy fix. The main room will be the center room, the right room will be the kitchen, the left the bedroom, the second floor is the attic, and the subfloor is the basement. Now, Animal Crossing houses do have a sixth room, a back room behind the center room, but you'll learn what that is a little bit later. The first room I wanted to talk about is the main room. It's the first room we see in the show, and there are a ton of details here. So the main details that I wanted to incorporate were the bookshelf, the sofa, and the TV. I also wanted to incorporate this clutter here at the bottom of the bookshelf. Let's take a look at the in-game now. This is the in-game room, and I'm really proud of how it came out. The first thing I want to talk about is the bookshelf. Initially, I had no clue what I wanted to do with this bookshelf, because there were no empty wooden shelves in the game. Then, I remembered I had the DIY recipe for the wooden bookshelf, and just comparing the size of the in-game room to the set room, the bigger bookshelf fills the space better than a smaller, empty wooden shelf would have done. And of course, we've got that clutter from Rambu getting clobbered by books. The next thing I want to talk about was the sofa. Now, I initially thought of using a double sofa, but I quickly scratched that thought in favor of the Nordic sofa. The color here is a dark wood Nordic sofa with a custom graphic on the cushions. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the TV. Now, I knew I wanted that box TV look, so I hopped on to Nookazon, which is where I got a lot of stuff for this build. Got a TV with VCR. Once I had it, the tricky part came of placing it in the room. If we look back at the set, the TV is crooked, pointing diagonally out into the corner. You can't do that in Animal Crossing. So, I had the TV and sofa face each other, and move them out away from the wall and pop that grandfather clock in to fill the space, and it turned out really nice. The next details I want to go over with this antique vanity and the rattan lamp to mimic this, where the vase was. I couldn't find a way to mimic the vase itself, but the idea is still there. The next thing I want to talk about is this toolbox. There's actually a toolbox in-game, in the set, and I found this DIY recipe sitting in my catalog, and I just had to add it. It was too perfect. Another detail is this deer head right here. I saw the DIY recipe for it while scrolling through my catalog and knew that I just had to put it in because it would match the one on set. And as I'm making the slide, I realized that that is a goat head and not a deer head, but it's the closest we're gonna get, so it's fine. Now let's talk about the walls. This wall right here, I actually used the accent wall effect to mimic the set. And this wall is a wall tile called Dark Wooden Mosaic, and I just had it in my DIY recipes. And I couldn't find a green wall to match the one in the set, so here you have this Delicate Blossoms wall. Now as I'm recording this, I'm realizing it's not the same wall, but it's close enough. And that's the main room. And now let's get on to the kitchen. And now let's look at the kitchen. All I knew what I wanted was I wanted the table and something that looks like the cabinet. That's it. That's all I had. I had no other plans. So much of this room came together by pure chance, and I think I managed to make it look pretty good. The first things that went in this room was the pot rack and the knife rack. They're actually from my main character's kitchen, and they fill the space on the wall pretty well. The next thing that I put in was this table, which I just found sitting in my storage. I don't even remember what it was, but it fills the space pretty well, and it looks exactly like the table in the set. Now came the part I was dreading. Now came the cooking part. I was dreading making this stonework kitchen, but I knew I wanted something that I could actually make food in-game. But there's just so many materials that go into the stonework kitchen. It's just, ugh. And then I discovered that you could make food on other items, and I felt kind of stupid. But that did make things a little bit easier because it meant I didn't have to collect all those materials. I knew I wanted the ironwood kitchenette, which is this guy. But it's not green like the cabinet, so I hopped onto Nookazon, went looking for a few different kitchens, and settled on this ranch kitchen, which I turned green, and we were good to go. Now, before I address the fridges, let's get on to some other stuff, like this cheese that I had sitting in storage. I don't know where it came from, I don't know why I got it. I just have it and thought it would be good. Like, Slimecicle's the type of dude to have this in his kitchen. And this sushi that I also found in storage, and I don't know why I have it, but you know what? Slimecicle's the type of dude to eat sushi. He'd eat sushi. You can't tell me he wouldn't. He'd eat sushi. And then I also added this tea set and this spice rack to fill some space. And this microwave, I actually found this on accident while scrolling through my Nook shopping app and knew it would be perfect. It's even in the right spot. And finally, the fridges. Now, there's no classic white fridge in base game, but I found this black mini fridge sitting in my storage, plopped it down, and moved on. But then it occurred to me that this item probably has a white colored option and can probably stack on top of itself. So, took the one in the kitchen, had Cyrus make it white, and then bought a black one to mimic this oven thingy, and a second white one to stack on top to make the second fridge, and boom! We had a fridge. I was so proud of this. And lastly, before the walls and floors, this painting. Now, initially, I wanted to use this for the portrait in the bedroom, but I couldn't find an option that looked like I wanted for the portrait. But one option did match this painting in the kitchen, so it was such a happy coincidence. Now onto the walls and floors. The walls is just a custom graphic that's a single green tile, and the floor is this really cute little floor that I just had sitting in my kitchen, and sitting in my kitchen, not my kitchen, I'm losing my mind. Sitting in storage, and it actually looks really cute and better than me trying to make a custom tile of that marble. And there we have the kitchen. This started out with no plans and ended up working out pretty well. So the third room we're going to look at is, of course, the bedroom. Now, a few key details here that I wanted to incorporate were the bed, the chest, the desk and chair, and of course, the iconic portrait. With these in mind, let's look at what I managed to pull for the recreation. This is the recreation room. So, the bed was initially the sloppy bed with green blankets, but it didn't fill the space the way I wanted it to. But then I saw the patch bed in Nook's cranny, had Cyrus turn it green, and boom, we had the bed. Which was better than my initial plan of getting the elegant bed off of Nookazon, which would have been a lot of bells. Anyway, next, the dresser. Now, initially, this was this antique wardrobe, which was never permanent and was only supposed to be a placeholder to allow my PC to change clothes while I made my actual plans. I ended up settling on this wooden block dresser that I found in my DIY recipes, changed its color, and we were good to go. The reason I didn't do just some random chest is because I wanted to retain the in-game function of my character changing clothes, which worked out quite nicely here. I wanted to keep the in-game function without losing the look, which actually ties into the same reason we have this vanity here. There's nothing really in the show that looks like this vanity, but it fits the room nicely, and I needed to have a place for my character to change appearance, so it fits. Almost last but not least, we have the desk and chair. I always knew that I wanted the study desk and the study chair to be in this room, so once I had those and changed their color, we were good to go. And last on the details but not least is the portrait. Now, I had thought of a few different ideas for the portrait, including Jack's portrait, but I ended up settling on this Jolly portrait that I got at Red's. When I initially bought it, I didn't care if it was real or if it was fake, but looking at it now, I think I got a real one. Doesn't really matter, I already have it in my museum. Fun fact, the actual painting is called Summer by Giuseppe Arcimboldo, if I'm pronouncing that right. Now onto the floors and walls. The floor is a custom graphic, but it's literally just a single tile covered the same tan tile like in the room, no big deal. The accent wall is the same as in the center room. It's the dark wooden mosaic wall that I had a DIY recipe for. And these walls, I had initially thought to go for the default wall, but I ended up going with this common wall, which I think works out much nicer. And now for the basement. The basement was actually the last room I worked on because it was the last housing update. And this particular room felt kind of tricky because there were a lot of things that were like easy I could get and toss them in the room, but there were also a few iconic things where I really didn't know if I could get them. But some of the details I wanted to include was the cardboard box, of course, obviously. And I also want to include these shelves because they're a pretty easy thing to add. This rocking horse, I knew there was definitely one in the game, and I was pretty sure I had seen one somewhere, but I didn't know where. I also wanted to include this table, whether or not I got the dollhouse or not, because I felt like it would feel empty without it. And of course, the iconic jail cell that Sneed was in. Apparently he was almost in a bird cage? I don't know how they thought that was gonna work, but this also works awesome. But my biggest fear was, am I gonna be able to get Frank? But it all worked out in the end. The first thing I got was, of course, the cardboard box. It was as simple as ordering it in-game because I already had the item and I just waiting for it to come in the in-game mail. I knew I had the recipe for these shelves, so they were pretty easy, but I also had the recipe for this iron rack. It was really nice. I knew I had the recipe for these jail bars, and I ended up making 2 because the room was big enough. And I also had this table, which was perfect. And while scrolling through my catalog, I found the DIY recipe for the rocking horse. And once I made it, boom, we had the rocking horse. We were good to go. And you can probably see it, but we have a skeleton. We have Frank. When I got on the Discord and celebrating that we had Frank, people were so hyped. We were happy we had Frank. And like I knew there was one in game, but I wasn't sure if I had it or if I was gonna have to go through Nookazon again, which I didn't want to do. So I didn't end up having the dollhouse, but I did have this mom's pen stand, which looks like a house and is really super cute, and it worked out. And with all of the bucket jokes made, I found the DIY recipe and thought, you know what, 3 buckets are needed. With all the buckets going on. Anyway, I also found the DIY recipe for these vine garlands and thought they would perfectly look like slime, and it does look pretty good. And that's all of the items in the room, and there are plenty of other items, but most of those other items are just to fill space. And I think this room worked out pretty well for how I started out with it, kind of nervous. For the flooring, it's just this basement flooring DIY recipe I had, and for the wall, it's actually this dungeon wall. I can't remember if I got it at Nook's Cranny or Sahara's, but anyway, I found it and I swiped it and knew it was perfect for this room. And that's the basement. That is the 4th room of the house. The fifth and penultimate room in this house is the attic. Now, I had very minimal plans for this, mostly just to fill space, but there's not much to see in this room. It's very empty. But the things that I did want to include was the desk, of course. These chairs in the back, I was pretty sure I had something that matched. And the fan, of course, the fan. And I also wanted to mimic this clutter in the back. But we'll come back to that in just a moment. In my opinion, this room is the least identifiable of all of the rooms, but I do think it still turned out pretty well. Of course, for the desk, we have this basic teacher's desk that works pretty well. For the swinging benches and the rocking chair, I knew I had those DIY recipes, made them, changed the color, and they were looking great. And I also found these shelves in Nook's Cranny and bought them and turned them green and stuffed them in there to mimic that clutter, and I think they look pretty good. Now here's where I started slowing down and not really knowing where I was going. And then I found this marimba sitting in storage. And I consulted Discord and we all agreed, yep, Slimesicle's the dude to just have a marimba lying around, whether or not he played it. And then we have this sewing machine, which I kind of just tossed in here just for fun. And then when looking back at the pictures to make the slides for the tour video, I noticed that there is an actual sewing machine in the clutter. This is supposed to mimic something that would look up like a Singer sewing machine. I know because my mother has one. And I just thought this was a really, really happy coincidence that I just plopped it in there and going back and it actually has one. In that same vein is also this fireplace, and while there's not exactly a fireplace in the set, there is this chimney behind Charlie, so it counts. But I do think it looks pretty nice to establish a Charlie's side versus Rambu's side, with like the desk versus the fireplace. And taking a look at this, I wanted to add things from the fight. Now, obviously, not all the items are there. Like, there's no hairdryer there, but there is a fan in-game. Turned it green, plopped it down, and we were good to go. And, of course, I had to add the classic towel that was Charlie Slimesicle's demise. And although I couldn't make the towels green, I thought the white towels with the copper rack looked pretty good. And, of course, the tricycle. I might turn it green at a later date, but for now, the tricycle works pretty well. I know there aren't a ton of items in this, but the room itself in the set is pretty empty, and I didn't want to run into any overcrowding. And for the walls and floors, you got your girl, the return of the dark mosaic wall. This time, it's the full wall, and I think it works pretty well, considering I didn't know how I was going to mimic the plywood. And this flooring actually matches what's in the thing, even though this one's horizontal instead of vertical. Don't at me. I think the horizontal looks better. And that was that. And that's the attic. That is the end of our attic. And now it is time for the final room, the mysterious back room. And I didn't have to think very hard about what I wanted this room to be, because I knew I wanted it to be one of the dimension door scenes. And there's one of those scenes that is so iconic that it would have been sacrilege to do anything else. You know it, you love it, Christian hell. I didn't have a lot of plans for this, and I did a lot of consulting with Discord on this, so thank you to the Discord, Rambu's Discord, Gen Law server, thank you. And this ended up being my ultimate favorite room out of all of them. Now, to start, I had no idea what I wanted the walls or floors to be, but then I visited Sahara and found this lava floor and was like, what else? And it worked out perfectly. And at the suggestion of someone in the Discord server, I added some campfires. And I only added 2 because I didn't want the space to be overcrowded because this room is kind of small, but campfires, what else? It would look ridiculous without some more fire. Even if we are in the middle of a magma cavern. And I did briefly consider adding a bonfire, but I felt it would be overcrowded with how big that item is, so I just scrapped it. It was at this point that I realized I didn't have a DIY workbench anywhere in the house, and I knew I wanted one. So I made this simple DIY workbench because it fits with the color scheme of the room and kind of blends in with where I placed it on the floor. It looks great, and it serves a function. And remember how I was consulting Discord? Well, this got recommended to me by a user, and I can't remember their username for the life of me, and it killed me. But they recommended the dead trees, and I knew I had one in my DIY recipes, so I made it, plopped it in there, and it was gorgeous. It was perfect. It really filled out the rooms. And one of the last things I put in this room before we get to the walls was, I don't know how I didn't think of this earlier, but there's this thing that I have called an ornithopter. I think you know where I'm going. There is a red option, and yes, it's the Hellbat. Of course, I had to add it. I couldn't not. You know it. You love it. The Hellbat. And now onto the walls, the wall saga. I cannot remember the username of the person on Nookazon, but I think it was Danny something, but thank you to Danny something for putting up with my BS so that I could get this magma wall from you. Thank you so darn much. And let me tell you, when we had a party in that Discord server, when this room got finished, we had a party. We were living it up. We were having so much fun. But yeah, that's the hell room. And with that finished, the house is complete. From screenshots off of YouTube to a house in Animal Crossing. The Generation Loss Episode 1 cabin, Animal Crossing New Horizons house, is complete. And I cannot thank everyone who has been involved enough. And that was the house. I hope you guys enjoyed. I know I did. I loved making it. And I had a lot of fun making it. I made a lot of acquaintances while making this. This is not the end. My next project will be Snoog, because he's actually an OC now. He's not just a funny little guy. Snoog has lore. I also have a sweatshirt that I'm working on, and a lot of Gen Loss props that I'm working on. So maybe I'll get around to finishing that. But thank you all so much for the moral support for this project, and thank you so much for putting up with my bullshit.